So let's dive into some of the actual training, and we'll start with phishing because, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, it's definitely the #1 thing that we're seeing out there. So some basic FAQs. Phishing is a cybercrime which is targeted, which a target is contacted by email, telephone, or text message by someone posing as a legitimate institution or individual. And they're after your sensitive data. It could be personally identifiable information, banking, or credit card details. How common is it? Well, extremely common. 156 million phishing emails are sent every day. That's the latest statistic. How do you fall victim? Well, typically you're going to receive an email and you're going to click on a link or open an attachment or fill out a form and give up some kind of sensitive information. Oftentimes that could be your email address, username, and password, but it could also be, as we said, credit card information, etc. And the impact? Well, typically a phishing attack ends up in some kind of financial loss. Additionally, if you're in a regulated business, whether that's healthcare, could be a government contractor, you may end up with a reportable breach depending on what information is given up. So what are the characteristics of a phishing attack? How can you spot these things or start to begin to spot these things? Well, in terms of phishing versus spear phishing, which we will talk about in a minute, phishing attacks are not personalized. You saw the numbers, 156 million a day. Well, they're mass emails that are sent to thousands and thousands of people at one time. And one of the key attributes of a phishing email is that they try to establish some kind of urgency. They want you to do something. So they're going to have words that are trying to incent you to take action. Act now to prevent account suspension, or if you don't do X, Y, Z, I'll send this to all your contacts. That type of language is going to be in a phishing email. So let's take a look at how you can spot these emails. On the right-hand side here, you can see what looks like a legitimate email message. The sender looks good. If you hover your mouse over the link at the top of the page, the PayPal logo there takes you to the legitimate PayPal site. But as you can see, attention, your PayPal account has been limited. There's one of the indicators that something may be up with this. And then if we take a look at the rest of the message, we begin to see the tenets of a phishing email. So bad English or spelling is common, or bad grammar. So activer, which really doesn't mean anything, is the button they want you to press. And then again, if you hover your mouse over a link, it's going to show you the address, the URL, where that will take you, the website that it's going to take you to. And oftentimes they try to disguise those websites. You can see here the actual domain that we're being sent to is emera-serve.com. They've tried to disguise it and make it look like paypal.com with the first part of the address there, but it really isn't. So key takeaway here, if you have any doubt about an email message, the link, don't click it, ask. Now, I already said Office 365 is a huge target for reasons we'll go into, but primarily they're trying to access your email account. And once they get access to that, they can do all sorts of things. We'll see some examples of that later on. So this is a fake message. Looks like it's from Office 365 or the Microsoft team. Microsoft will rarely, if ever, send a message that looks anything like this. They're not going to ask you to change your password in this way. If we hover over the link in this email, again, we can clearly see that this website that it's trying to take us to is not a Microsoft website. So again, hover over links with your mouse. That will show you where the link is going to take you. And if you do end up on what looks like a Microsoft website, take a minute to look at the web page, because there's dozens, if not hundreds, of fake Microsoft sign-in sites that have been put up out there. In this case, we can see that the website's not secure and the domain or the URL is clearly not Microsoft.com. This looks like potentially a hacked website that's had this page inserted into it. So take a minute, take a look at your browser and what it's warning you about, if anything, and make sure it's a legitimate Microsoft site that you're logging into. Okay, so I mentioned spear phishing. What is spear phishing? It's a highly targeted phishing email, essentially, highly personalized. And spear phishing, excuse me, will attack an individual, and the attacker is typically going to know who that person is, who they work for, who their boss is, what their job function is. And they collect this type of information in many different ways. You might have a LinkedIn profile with that information on it. You might have a Facebook account. It might be on your company website. So they're going to target that person and pretend typically to be someone like a CEO or a CFO and get that person to take action. So one of the key things in a simple spear phishing attack to look at is, does the email address of the sender match the name? Because often it's very easy to make the name appear as the CEO, but the email address is going to be a free gmail.com, hotmail.com, outlook.com. Those type of addresses are commonly used. Now, the attackers can actually spoof that email address. It is possible for them to make it look like it did actually come from a legitimate email address. So what we'll often see is, if that's the case, when you click reply, the reply address is then different. So it won't match the address that the email looks like it came from. So double check where you're replying to. The other advice I'd have here is, if it's looks like it's from your CFO or your CEO, pick up the phone, talk to them and ask them. If they're asking you to do something that seems odd to you, ask the question rather than just acting. So what to do if you think you've been a victim? And to be clear, this is if you've clicked on something, if you've gone to a website and typed in your credentials and you're having second thoughts. Our number one piece of advice, the first thing to do, especially if you've typed in your credentials somewhere, change your password. And then immediately afterwards, contact your IT department, if that's EXP or an internal team, that we can then diagnose what's going on, take it from there. Okay, so changing gears and looking at ransomware. FAQs as before. So what is ransomware? It's a type of malware that encrypts all the data on your PC or potentially on your server and the rest of your network and demands payment to unencrypt it. In terms of how frequent ransomware attacks are, the current statistics state about 40,000 attacks per day. How do you fall victim? Well, typically you're clicking on something, you're opening an attachment and allowing this software to be installed on your computer. We've seen it on social media sites, via instant messaging services, or in some cases, simply by visiting a website, you can get infected. And in terms of the impact, well, a single person who becomes victim of a ransomware attack, as I said, if they have access to the servers, the map drives, the shares, all of those can become encrypted as long as they have read-write permissions to it. And again, if you're in a highly regulated business, this may be a reportable incident. So in terms of preventing ransomware, number 1 and 2, pretty much the same. If you don't recognize a sender, if you're not expecting something from that person, if there's bad grammar, bad spelling, don't open the attachment, don't click on the link. So 3, 4, and 5 are really about prevention. Almost all our clients are using some kind of security service to scan their inbound email and try and block some of these things. Office 365 has some built-in mechanisms. Some of our clients are using third-party services as well. However, nothing is 100% foolproof. So although of course, you must use one of these services, some things will still get through. These days, everyone knows antivirus software should be on your PC or indeed on your Mac. As I mentioned, Macs are targets. So keep that up to date. And then in terms of recovery, the last one actually is really more about recovery. Having backups is critical. If you don't want to have to pay the ransom, if for somehow you do get your data encrypted, having a backup is going to enable you to recover. And having a backup that is checked frequently, is secure, because we've also seen the backups themselves get encrypted. So secure and of course tested so that you know you can actually restore your data in the event of an attack. Now, in terms of spotting whether you've been the victim, what we see is there'll either be a little notepad file, a little text file dropped in next to your files that have been encrypted. It'll probably be called some kind of README. That's one sign that your files have been encrypted, apart from the fact you can't open and read them and work with them. We've also seen pop-ups. So a message will appear on your screen, like on the right here, basically saying, hey, we've encrypted your files. Here's how much you need to pay us. We're going to increase the payment over time. So many of them will also tell you not to shut down your computer. And actually, our advice is quite the opposite. If you think you've been the victim of an attack, the first thing you should do is shut down your computer, because that will stop it spreading. And then obviously notify your IT team, EXP or other. So I've got 3 stories from the field, as we call them. So real attacks that are a little outside the norm, not the typical, hey, wire transfer money, some inventive attacks that we've seen out there over the last couple of years. So the first one's what we call payroll redirection. In this case, it started with a phishing email, and the person who was attacked gave up their Microsoft Office 365 login credentials. And clearly what happened is the attacker logged in to their email via Outlook Web Access, which of course is available on the internet from anywhere in the world. The attackers quickly figured out that this particular company was using an online payroll system or HR information system. And they figured out what that was, and they were able to go ahead and reset that person's password, receive the email because they had access to their mailbox, reset the password and gain access to that system. And then they changed the payroll information, the direct deposit information for this person's paycheck to their own bank account and got their hands on the money that way. Story number 2 is what we call invoice hijacking. So similar scenario, phishing email, and this time it had a PDF attachment that then had a link that then invited the person to enter their credentials into a fake Microsoft Office login site. They got access to the mailbox. Interestingly enough, though, in this case, they didn't take action immediately. They just waited. They sat with access to the mailbox and they waited. In the meantime, they set up a forwarder to an external account. So any message that arrived in this person's mailbox was forwarded to a Gmail account. And they monitored their email. And when they saw a large invoice go outbound from this particular person who happened to be in an accounting department, so this is an outbound invoice to one of their clients, that's when they inserted themselves into the email thread. Bear in mind, they still had access to the mailbox at this time, direct access. And they tried to tell the customer to pay to their new bank account this large invoice. Now, in this case, we actually caught this before they managed to get their hands on the money, but you can see how they were trying to get paid to their own bank account for this large invoice. And finally, slightly different type of attack, tax return fraud. Again, it all started with an email, a spear phishing email in this case. And it looked like it came from the CEO of this organization, and it requested that a PDF copy of all the W-2s for all employees was sent to the CEO. The person actually responded with that attachment, and the attackers fraudulently filed tax returns for some of the people whose W-2s they received, and then collected a refund check at an address that they had provided, thereby getting their hands on the money. So you can see that some of these attacks are pretty creative, and they'll go to lengths in order to